First, we want to consider objections to the form of the argument. So, objection number one. Craig says that he believes in God on the basis of the self-authenticating witness of the Holy Spirit in his heart, not on the basis of the Kalam cosmological argument. In fact, he says that even if the argument were refuted, he would still believe in God. This is blatant hypocrisy on Craig's part. Response to objection number one. The problem with this objection is that even if I were a hypocrite, there's just no relationship between the soundness of an argument and the psychological state of the person propounding it. The objector is thus guilty of putting forth a textbook example of an argument ad hominem. That is to say, trying to invalidate a position by attacking the character of the person who defends it. So, what does make for a sound deductive argument? The answer is true premises and valid logic. True premises and valid logic. An argument is sound if the premises of the argument are true and the conclusion follows from the premises by the rules of logic. The soundness of the Kalam cosmological argument is thus entirely independent of me. The argument was, after all, defended by the medieval Muslim theologian Al-Ghazali 1,000 years before I was born. If the argument is sound, it was sound then. If the argument is sound, it was sound during the Jurassic period, before anyone had propounded it. My alleged hypocrisy just has nothing to do with the soundness of the argument. Now, to be a good argument, the argument must admittedly be more than merely sound. If the premises of an argument are true, but we have no evidence for the truth of those premises, then the argument will not be a good one. It may, unbeknownst to us, be sound, but in the absence of any evidence for the premises, it won't, or at least shouldn't, convince anyone. The premises have to have some kind of epistemic warrant for us in order for a sound argument to be a good argument. Now, I've argued that what is needed is that the premises need to be not only true, but more plausible than their opposites or negations. If it is more plausible that a premise is true in light of the evidence rather than false, then we ought to believe the premise. Now, plausibility is, to a certain degree, person relative. Some people may find a premise more plausible than its opposite, while others may not. In that sense, the goodness of an argument is not wholly independent of people's psychological states. In the case of the Kalam cosmological argument, I do in fact find the premises more plausible than their opposites, and therefore I'm convinced that it is a good argument. I just don't regard the argument as the basis for my belief in God. And I've been quite candid about that. My belief in God is a properly basic belief grounded in the inner witness of God's Holy Spirit. And I find it odd that rather than being commended for my candor, I'm accused of hypocrisy. I've elsewhere defended the proper basicality of belief in God on the basis of the Spirit's witness, but that's quite unnecessary here, for even if I were entirely mistaken about that, it would have no bearing on the worth of the Kalam cosmological argument. To illustrate the point, suppose I believe that Abraham Lincoln was one of the greatest of the American presidents. And in order to convince you of this, I present to you the testimony of expert historians, along with a detailed account of Lincoln's amazing accomplishments. But suppose that the real reason that I think Lincoln was so great is because he had a beard. And I once had a beard, and therefore am prejudiced in favor of bearded presidents. Obviously, my personal prejudice would have no bearing whatsoever upon the worth of the evidence for Lincoln's greatness. Similarly, whatever reason I have personally for believing in God, whether it's the witness of the Holy Spirit or the ontological argument or the teleological argument or divine revelation or whatever, that just has no relation to the soundness or the worth of the Kalam cosmological argument. The skeptic may not like my taking belief in God as properly basic, but that's not a criticism of the Kalam cosmological argument. That's at best a rejection of proper basicality of belief in God, which has simply no bearing on the worth of the Kalam argument.